March 22nd, Music 1945, the Rhine River, Germany. The war in Europe was entering its final phase. Allied armies were pushing deep into Germany from the west. The Red Army was closing in from the east. The Third Reich was collapsing. But the Germans were not surrendering quietly. Music, they were fighting with desperate ferocity, making the Allies pay for every mile. And on the eastern bank of the Rhine River, 100 American soldiers were about to pay the ultimate price. Task Force Baum, composed primarily of the 314th Music Infantry Regiment, had crossed the Rhine 3 days earlier as part of Third Army's drive into Germany. Their mission was to secure a bridgehead and hold it until reinforcements arrived. But something had gone wrong. German forces stronger than intelligence had predicted counterattacked. They surrounded Task Force Baum on 3 sides, Music pushing the Americans back against the Rhine River. With the river at their backs and Germans closing in, the 120 men were trapped. Colonel James Polk, commanding the task force, assessed the situation from a makeshift command post in a bombed-out farmhouse. Ammunition was running low, food was almost gone, medical supplies were exhausted, and German artillery was pounding their positions' music relentlessly. He turned to his radio operator, send message to division. Task Force Baum surrounded, Germans attacking from north, east, and south, Rhine River blocks retreat, ammunition critical, casualties mounting, request immediate relief or we will be overrun, Polk. The message was transmitted at 14 Armans, but on March 22nd, it reached 3rd Army Headquarters within minutes, then was forwarded to SHA, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, Eisenhower's command. At Shaw, staff officers gathered around maps discussing options. The situation was clear. 100 American soldiers were surrounded deep in German territory. Rescuing Music then would require a major operation. General Omar Bradley, commanding the 12th Army Group, chaired the emergency meeting. Gentlemen, we have a serious situation. Task Force Baum is surrounded. They have maybe 48 hours before they are destroyed. We need a rescue plan. A logistics officer pointed Music to the map. Sir, Task Force Baum is here approximately 150 km inside German territory. To organize a proper relief column, adequate force, supplies, artillery support, we need at least 4 days. They do not have 4 days, Bradley said. What about an Arab, supplies, ammunition? Weather is marginal, sir, and even with supplies, they are still surrounded. We need to break the German encirclement. Another officer suggested, what if we send a battalion strength force? Move fast, light, punch through to them. Too risky. A battalion could be cut off just like Task Force Baum. We need overwhelming force to guarantee success. The debate continued. 4 days to organize a proper rescue, but Task Force Baum did not have 4 days. The clock was ticking. Meanwhile, at 3rd Army Headquarters 200 km away, Lieutenant General George S. Patton, Jr., was receiving the same situation briefing. Patton stood at a large map table studying the Music positions. His Chief of Staff, General Hugh Gaffey, pointed to Task Force Music Baum's location. Sir, they are surrounded here. Shah is planning a rescue operation, but it will take 4 to 5 days to organize. Patton measured the distance with his fingers. 150 km from our current positions to Task Force Baum. How long do they have? Intelligence estimates they can hold for maybe 48 hours. After that, the Germans will overrun them. Patton did mental calculations, 150 km. Music his armored divisions could cover that distance in what conventional doctrine said 3 days minimum. Cautious commanders would say 4 or 5 days to be safe. But Patton was not a conventional or cautious commander. We can't be there in 36 hours, Patton said. The room went silent. Every officer stared at him. Gaffey spoke carefully. Sir, that is 150 km through enemy territory. To cover that distance in 36 hours would require moving at maximum speed Music without stopping, which is exactly what we will do. Sir, the Germans will resist. We would have to fight through multiple defensive positions. Then we fight through them, but we do not stop. We maintain momentum. Another staff officer objected. General, doctrine calls for methodical advance with secured flanks. If we race through German territory at that speed, Music we expose ourselves to counterattack. Patton turned to face him. Doctrine also calls for not abandoning 100 to 200 American soldiers to die while we debate logistics. Speed is our weapon. The Germans will not have time to organize resistance if we move fast enough. But sir, no buts. We are doing this. Mobilize 4th Armored Division. Combat Commander will lead. They depart at dawn tomorrow. Route will be direct straight line to Task Force Baum. No deviations. Music, no delays. Any German forces that block the route are destroyed. Any that do not are bypassed. Clear, sir. Should we request authorization from Shah? Patton smiled coldly. By the time Shah authorizes this, Task Force Baum will be dead. We are not asking permission. We are executing a rescue. Now move. The staff scrambled to prepare orders. Patton returned to the map, tracing the route his armored column would take. 150 km through German territory in 36 hours. It was audacious, risky. Some would call it reckless, but Rafe and 200 men were going to die if someone did not take that risk. That evening, Patton visited the 4th Armored Division, which would lead Music the rescue. He addressed the assembled tank commanders, captains, and majors who would execute his plan. Gentlemen, I am about to ask you to do something that every tactical manual says is impossible. You are going to drive 150 km through enemy territory in 36 hours. You will not stop to consolidate positions. You will not stop to clear resistance. You will stop only to destroy obstacles that block your path. Everything else you bypass. He paused, looking at their faces. Young men, exhausted from months of combat, being asked to do the impossible one more time. There are 1/200 American soldiers surrounded on the Rhine. They are out of ammunition, out of food, out of time. If we do not reach them in 36 hours, they will be slaughtered. That is unacceptable. So we are going to do the impossible. We are going to reach them and we are going to bring them home. A tank commander asked. Sir, what if we encounter heavy resistance? Then you destroy it and keep moving. Your mission is not to fight the German army. Your mission is to reach Task Force Baum. Speed is more important than security. Momentum is more important than caution. Any questions? No one spoke. They understood this was a gamble, but it was a gamble Patton was willing to take. Good. You depart at 5 more hours. Godspeed, gentlemen. That night, Patton wrote in his diary, Shaw is planning a rescue that will take 4 days. Task Force Baum will be dead in 2. So I am launching my own operation. 150 km in 36 hours. The staff thinks I am crazy. The Germans will think I am insane. Good. Insanity is what wins wars. At midnight, final orders went out to 4th Armored Division. The rescue column would consist of 53 Sherman tanks, 28 half-tracks with infantry, artillery support, and supply vehicles. Approximately 1,500 men total, a relatively light force for such a deep penetration into enemy Music territory. But Patton was counting on speed, not strength. The Germans would not be able to respond if the column moved fast enough. At 04 hours on March 23rd, tank crews were awakened. Engine started, final checks completed. The column formed up in the darkness. At 04:55 hours, Patton arrived at the departure point. He walked along the line of tanks, speaking to crews. You are about to make history, move fast, hit hard, bring our boys home. At exactly 5 Wissens hours, the lead tank crossed the start line. The rescue had begun. Patton stood watching the column disappear into the pre-dawn darkness. His staff stood beside him, worried. General Gaffey said quietly, Sir, if this fails, Shaw will relieve you of command. Patton did not take his eyes off the road. If this fails, 100 men will be dead. My career does not matter compared to that. Now, let us make sure it does not fail. March 23rd, 1945, 05 hours, Eastern Germany. The rescue column of 4th Armored Division punched into German held territory like a spear. 53 Sherman tanks led the way, followed by half-tracks carrying infantry, supply vehicles bringing fuel and ammunition, and self-propelled artillery providing fire support. Leading the column was Lieutenant Colonel Cratton Abrams, commanding Combat Command B. Abrams was one of Patton's most aggressive officers, a tank commander who believed in speed, violence, and overwhelming firepower. Patton's orders to Abrams had been simple: 150 km in 36 hours, do not stop. Do not consolidate, reach Task Force Baum before the Germans kill them. Abrams transmitted those orders to his battalion commanders. Maximum music speed. We engage only what blocks our path. Everything else we bypass. We are not here to conquer territory. We are here to save lives. The column moved at 25 km/h, fast for armored vehicles on rough roads, but not fast enough for Patton's timeline. Abrams pushed harder, 30 km/h, 35 in open terrain. At 07:30 hours, the column encountered its first resistance. A German roadblock, 2 anti-tank guns, infantry dug in, blocking the main highway. Standard doctrine called for stopping, deploying infantry, suppressing the position with artillery, then assaulting. That process would take an hour, maybe 2. Abrams did not stop. He radioed his lead tank, overrun them. The Sherman column did not slow down. They opened fire on the move. 75 mm main guns, 50 caliber machine guns, and charged directly at the roadblock. The German anti-tank guns managed 2 shots before being crushed under Sherman treads. Infantry scattered. The entire engagement lasted 4 minutes. The column kept moving. At 09 hours, 4 hours into the mission, they had covered 40 km. Abrams checked his map. 110 km to go, 32 hours remaining. They were slightly ahead of schedule, but German resistance was increasing. Radio intercepts showed German commanders scrambling to understand what was happening. Large American armored column advancing at high speed, unable to determine objective, recommend immediate reinforcement of defensive positions. By the time German commanders identified sectors to reinforce, the American column had already passed through. At 11 hours, Abrams' column reached a small German town, Mühlhausen, that sat astride the only good road east. Intelligence reported German forces in the town, possibly a company of infantry, maybe some tanks. Again, doctrine called for stopping, deploying, clearing the town methodically. Hours of work. Abrams radioed his commanders. We go through the middle full speed. Shoot anything that moves. The Sherman column entered Mühlhausen at 35 km/h. Germans in buildings opened fire with machine guns and Panzerasts, German anti-tank rockets. 2 Shermans were hit and disabled, but the other 51 kept going, firing into buildings as they passed. The town was 5 km long. The column crossed it in 9 minutes. Behind them, Mühlhausen was chaos, buildings burning, German soldiers stunned by the speed and violence of the passage. But Abrams did not care about Mühlhausen. He cared about Task Force Baum, still 90 km ahead. At 130 hours, 8 hours into the mission, fuel became an issue. The Shermans were consuming gasoline at an incredible rate, moving at high speed, engines running constantly. Fuel tanks were draining faster than planned. Abrams radioed back to Patton's headquarters. Fuel critical. We need resupply. Patton's response was immediate. Capture German fuel. Do not stop. At 14:30 hours, reconnaissance spotted a German supply depot 3 km off the main route. Abrams detached a platoon of tanks to raid it. They overran the depot in 15 minutes, killed the guards, and found exactly music what they needed. 5 zeros, 0 L of diesel fuel. The platoon rejoined the main column, bringing fuel. The column refueled on the move. Supply trucks pulling alongside tanks, crews hooking up hoses while vehicles continued driving. It was dangerous, music inefficient, and exactly what was needed. By 18 hours, 13 hours into the mission, they had covered 80 km, 70 km remaining, 23 hours left. They were still on schedule, barely, but exhaustion was becoming a problem. Tank crews had been operating for 13 hours straight. Drivers were struggling to stay awake. Fatigue-related errors were increasing. Tanks running off roads, navigational mistakes. Abrams knew his men needed rest, but he also knew that every hour they rested was an hour closer to Task Force Baum being overrun. He radioed his commanders. Rotate drivers, code, drivers take over. Gunners and loaders rest in shifts, but tanks do not stop. We keep moving. It was brutal, but necessary. Night fell. The column switched on minimal lights, just enough to avoid collisions. Driving at night through enemy territory was incredibly dangerous, but stopping was not an option. At 22 cow, 17 hours into the mission, they encountered their most serious resistance. a German armored unit, approximately 20 Panther tanks, had set up a defensive position across the highway. Panthers were superior to Shermans in almost every way. Better armor, better gun, better optics. In a straight fight, 20 Panthers could destroy Abrams' entire column, but Abrams was not offering a straight fight. He split his column. Half would engage the Panthers head-on, fixing them in place. The other half would swing wide, bypass the position, and continue toward Task Force Baum. It was a calculated gamble. He was sacrificing half his force to save the other half, and he was betting that the bypassing force could reach Task Force Baum before the Germans realized what was happening. The engagement began at 2,215 hours. 26 Shermans faced 20 Panthers in a night battle. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness. Armor, piercing rounds streeted. Panthers burned. Music while that battle raged. The other 27 Shermans swung 10 km south, bypassed the fight entirely, and continued east. By 2,330 hours, the battle was over. 14 Shermans destroyed, 11 Panthers destroyed. The surviving Shermans pulled back, their mission accomplished. They had bought time for the bypassing force. Abrams, leading the bypassing group, radioed back to the engaged force. "Well done, return to base when able. We continue to objective." His force was now down to 27 tanks, but they were only 40 km from Task Force Baum, and they had 16 hours remaining. At 02 hours on March 24th, 21 hours into the mission, German radio traffic indicated panic. American armored column has penetrated to Rhine sector. Music objective unclear. All available forces redirect to intercept, but the German response was too slow. By the time reinforcements were moving, Abrams' column had already passed through their sectors. At 060 hours, 25 hours into the mission, reconnaissance reported visual contact with Task Force Baum's positions. They were 15 km away. Abrams increased speed, 40 km per hour on the final approach. Tank crews, exhausted beyond measure, found reserves of energy, knowing they were close. At 8 hours, music, they could see the smoke from German artillery pounding Task Force Baum's perimeter. At 8:30 hours, music, Abrams' lead tanks crested a hill and saw the battlefield. Task Force Baum was dug in around a small village. German forces, approximately battalion strength, had them surrounded on 3 sides. The Rhine River blocked the 4th side. Abrams did not slow down. Music, he radioed his force, all tanks full attack, break their line. 27 Sherman tanks charged down the hill at maximum speed, guns firing. The Germans, focused on Task Force Baum, did not see them coming until it was too late. The Shermans smashed into the German rear. Artillery positions were overrun, infantry scattered, command posts were destroyed. In 15 minutes of absolute chaos, the German encirclement collapsed. Music inside Task Force Baum's perimeter. Colonel Polk heard the explosions, saw the Shermans, realized what was happening. They came, he said, stunned. Someone actually came. Soldiers who had been preparing to die were now crying with relief. Sherman tanks rolled into the perimeter, crews waving, exhausted but triumphant. Abrams dismounted from his tank and found Colonel Polk. "Colonel, General Patton sends his regards. We are here to take you home." Polk, a tough veteran who had fought across Europe, had tears in his eyes. "How long did it take you?" 30 hours from departure, 150 km. "That is impossible," Abrams smiled. "General Patton does not accept impossible." The evacuation began immediately. Wounded from Task Force Baum were loaded onto half-tracks and supply vehicles. Those who could walk climbed onto the tanks. Within 2 hours, the entire force, 100 men from Task Force Baum, plus Abrams' 400 rescuers, music was moving back west. The return journey took 3 days with wounded to care for, and German forces now alerted to their presence. They could not move at the same breakneck pace, but it did not matter. The rescue was complete. On March 27th, the column crossed back into Allied-held territory. All 100 men from Task Force Baum had survived. Music, the rescue operation had succeeded. When Patton received confirmation, he wrote in his diary, "Task Force Baum rescued 150 km in 30 hours, 100 men saved. They said it could not be done. I proved them wrong." Again, March 25th, 1945, 10 Downing Street, London. Winston Churchill sat at his desk music in the cabinet war rooms, working through the morning dispatches. The Prime Minister was 70 years old, exhausted from 5 years of war, but still commanding British strategy with the same fierce determination that had sustained the nation through its darkest hours. His secretary entered with a leather folder. "Prime Minister, the overnight operational reports from Chaff." Churchill waved his hand without looking up. "Leave them. I shall review shortly. Sir, there is one report you may wish to see immediately." General Patton's Third Army. Churchill paused. Patton, the name always caught his attention. The American general was controversial, arrogant, music insubordinate, politically problematic. But Churchill recognized military talent when he saw it. Music, even talent wrapped in such an infuriating package. "What has Patton done now?" "A rescue operation, sir. Task Force Baum. 200 American soldiers surrounded on the Rhine. Third Army executed a relief operation." Yes, I saw the initial reports yesterday. Schaff was planning a rescue, expected to take 4 or 5 days. The secretary smiled slightly. "General Patton did not wait for Shaw's plans, sir. He launched his own operation." Music. His armored forces advanced 150 km through German territory in 36 hours music and rescued all 22 men. Churchill looked up sharply. "What did you say? 150 km in 36 hours, sir, confirmed by multiple sources." Churchill took the folder and opened it. The operational summary was brief music but clear. Operation summary: Third Army relief of Task Force Baum. Commenced 500 hours 23rd of March. 4th Armored Division Combat Command B under Lieutenant Kohlers Abrams. Distance 150 km through enemy territory. Duration 30 hours actual, 36 hours total, including consolidation. Result: 1-200 personnel of Task Force Baum successfully evacuated. Enemy casualties estimated 400 plus KIA. Multiple defensive positions destroyed. Friendly casualties: 14 tanks destroyed, 23 Kia, 47 WIA. Operation assessed as complete success. Churchill read it twice. Then a third time he removed his reading glasses and set them on the desk. 150 km in 36 hours, he music said quietly, through enemy territory under combat conditions. Yes, Prime Minister. Churchill stood and walked to the large wall map of Europe that dominated his office. He found the Rhine River, traced the distance with his finger, 150 km in 36 hours. The military implications were staggering. Modern doctrine, British, American, German, all agreed that armored advances through hostile territory required methodical progression, reconnaissance, securing flanks, establishing supply lines. An advance of 150 km should take a week, perhaps longer. Patton had done it in a day and a half. Churchill lit a cigar, a ritual that helped him think. He drew deeply, music exhaled smoke, and continued staring at the map. U.S. Chief of the Imperial General Staff, Field Marshal Alan Brooke, entered for their scheduled morning briefing. "Good morning, Prime Minister. I see you have received the patent report." "I have. Tell me, Alan, is this accurate? 150 km in 36 hours. Brooke nodded. Confirmed by American liaison officers. Patton bypassed normal approval channels, launched the operation on his own initiative, and executed it with remarkable speed. Remarkable is an understatement. "This is extraordinary. It is also reckless," Brooke said carefully. "Patton exposed his forces to potential encirclement. If the Germans had responded more effectively, the rescue column could have been cut off. He gambled and won, but it was a gamble." Churchill turned from the map. "Alan, we have spent 5 years of this war being cautious, being methodical, and we have won slowly at great cost. Patton throws caution aside and wins quickly with minimal casualties. Perhaps there is a lesson there, or perhaps he has been lucky. 150 km in 36 hours is not luck. That is generalship of the highest order. Speed, audacity, execution. Those are the qualities that win wars decisively." Brooke knew better than to argue when Churchill was in this mood. "What do you intend to do, Prime Minister?" "I intend to acknowledge excellence when I see it." Churchill walked to his desk and pulled out stationery. "Draft a message to General Eisenhower. Copy to General Patton." He dictated. "General Eisenhower, I have received reports of General Patton's rescue of Task Force Baum. The operation represents one of the most audacious and successful tactical maneuvers of this war. General Patton's speed and determination saved 200 100 lives that would have been lost under less bold command. His Majesty's government recognizes and salutes this remarkable achievement. Churchill. Brooke transcribed the message. I shall have this transmitted immediately. Wait, I am not finished. Churchill paused, choosing his words carefully. Add a personal note, for my eyes and Eisenhower's only, not for official record. Ike, Patton may be impossible to manage, but he is irreplaceable. If we had 10 like him, this war would have ended a year ago. Brooke raised an eyebrow. Prime Minister, that is high praise from you. It is deserved praise. I do not give it lightly. After Brooke left to transmit music the message, Churchill returned to his desk. He picked up the operational report again, reading the details, the route Patton's column had taken, the speed of advance, the minimal casualties despite moving through enemy territory. It was, Churchill reflected, exactly the kind of operation he had advocated for Britain to execute. Bold, swift, decisive, but British commanders had been too cautious, too worried about risks, too bound by conventional doctrine, and here was this American general, this difficult, music-arrogant, brilliant American general, proving that audacity worked. Churchill's private secretary, John Colville, entered. Prime Minister, you seem pleased. Pleased, I am astonished, inspired even. Churchill music gestured to the map. Look at this. John Patton advanced 150 km through German territory faster than the Germans retreated in 1940. Music he has turned blitzkrieg into an art form. The Americans seem to have a talent for aggressive warfare, not the Americans, Patton. There is a difference. Churchill sat down heavily. Most generals, British, American, German, play warlike chess, careful moves, protecting music pieces, minimizing risks. Patton plays war like a Viking raid. Speed, violence, overwhelming force applied at the decisive point. It is crude, yes, but by God it works. Colville smiled. You admire him. I do, grudgingly, reluctantly, but I do. Churchill tapped ash from his cigar. You know, John Music Patton and I have never gotten along personally. We met in Sicily, disliked each other instantly. He thinks I am a meddling politician. I think he is an insubordinate cowboy, but personal feelings are irrelevant. The man is a military genius, and I will not let pride prevent me from acknowledging it. That afternoon, Churchill attended a war cabinet meeting. He brought up the patent operation. Gentlemen, I want to discuss the rescue of Task Force Baum. It is instructive for our own planning. Anthony Music Eden, the Foreign Secretary, asked, in what way, Prime Minister? In demonstrating that speed and audacity can achieve results that caution cannot, Patton rescued 100 men in 36 hours. Chef was planning a rescue that would take 4 days. The difference, Patton was willing to take risks, to move faster than doctrine permitted, to trust his instincts over staff recommendations. A minister interjected, but Prime Minister, such tactics could lead to disaster if they fail. Could, but did not, that is the point. We have become so risk-averse that we no longer attempt operations that might fail, but the greatest victories come from the greatest risks. Churchill continued, I am not suggesting we abandon caution entirely, but I am suggesting we need more commanders willing to take calculated risks. Patton is such a commander, music, and frankly, we could use more like him. The discussion continued, but Churchill's point had been made. Patton's rescue operation was not just a tactical success. It was a lesson in leadership and decision-making. That evening, Churchill sat alone in his study, reviewing maps of the final campaigns. The war was nearly over. Germany was collapsing. Victory was weeks away, perhaps music days, and Churchill thought about the cost. 5 years of war, millions dead, cities destroyed, a generation scarred. Could it have ended sooner? If more generals had operated like Patton, aggressively, decisively, without hesitation, could the war have been shorter? He would never know, but the question haunted him. He opened his diary and wrote, March 25, 1945, received report of Patton's rescue operation, 150 km in 36 hours, 200 men saved. It is the kind of operation I have dreamed British forces could execute, but rarely have. Patton is infuriating, undisciplined, and politically disastrous. He is also the finest tactical commander this war has produced. I have sent formal congratulations, but privately I must acknowledge if Britain had produced a patent, this war would have been over long ago. He closed the diary and sat in silence, music cigar smoke curling in the lamplight. Winston Churchill, music who had spent 5 years inspiring a nation to endure impossible odds, who had stood alone against Hitler when all seemed lost, music who had built coalitions and directed strategy across 3 continents. Even he could recognize when someone else had achieved something extraordinary, and George Patton, the difficult American general he had never liked personally, had just done exactly that. March 28, 1945, 3rd Army Headquarters, Germany. General Patton stood in his office reading the message that had arrived from London via shaft channels. It was typed on official British government stationery marked from the office of the Prime Minister. He read it once, then again, then he sat down and read it a 3rd time. The message was formal, diplomatic, everything one would expect from Winston Churchill. General Patton, I have received detailed reports of your rescue of Task Force Baum. The operation represents one of the most audacious and successful tactical maneuvers of this war. Your speed and determination saved 1,200 lives that would have been lost under less bold command. His Majesty's government recognizes and salutes this remarkable achievement. Winston S. Churchill, Prime Minister. Patton set the message down and stared at it. Recognition from Churchill, the man who had led Britain through its darkest hour, the man who had stood alone against Hitler when all of Europe had fallen, the man Patton had met in Sicily and clashed with immediately, 2 massive egos colliding like thunderstorms. Churchill had just called his operation one of the most audacious and successful tactical maneuvers of this war coming from Churchill. That was not faint praise, that was extraordinary recognition. General Hugh Gaffney entered. Sir, I see you received the message from London. I did. Patton picked it up again. Churchill called it audacious. From him that is high praise. It is, sir. The Prime Minister does not give compliments lightly. Patton stood and walked to his map. Hugh, do you know what this means? Churchill. The man who orchestrated Gallipoli, who planned Norway, who pushed for Italy. Churchill is acknowledging that we did something he wishes Britain could have done. That is a significant acknowledgement, sir. It is more than that. It is validation. Patton turned from the map. I have spent this entire war being told I am too aggressive, too risky, too reckless. Eisenhower restrains me. Bradley questions me. She second, guesses me. And now the Prime Minister of Great Britain says what I did was exactly right. But Patton's satisfaction went beyond personal vindication. Churchill's message represented something larger, recognition from a peer, another leader who understood that war required boldness, that caution could be as deadly as recklessness, that the greatest victories came from the greatest risks. Patton walked to his desk and sat down to draft his reply. He wanted to get the tone exactly right, respectful, but not subservient, appreciative, but not fawning. Prime Minister Churchill, I am honored by your recognition of 3rd Army's rescue operation. The 2,200 men of Task Force Baum are alive today because this army believes in speed, aggression, and decisive action. Your acknowledgement means more than any decoration, as it comes from a leader who understands that wars are won by those willing to seize opportunity when it presents itself. With deepest respect, George S. Patton, Jr. He sealed the message and handed it to his communications officer for transmission. London. Later that day, Patton visited the men of Task Force Baum, who were recovering at a field hospital. Colonel Polk and his soldiers had been evacuated, treated for wounds and exhaustion, and were now being processed for return to their units. When Patton entered the hospital ward, the men struggled to stand and salute. He waved them down. Stay seated, gentlemen. You have earned your rest. Colonel Polk approached. General Patton, sir, I want to thank you personally. We thought we were dead, and then your music tanks came over that hill. Patton clasped his shoulder. Colonel, I could not leave 1 to 200 Americans to die while I sat in headquarters debating logistics. The decision was simple. You needed rescue. We had the capability. We executed. Sir, they are saying you advanced 150 km in 36 hours. Music that you ignored orders from Chaff, that you risked your entire command. To save us, risked perhaps, but calculated risk is different from recklessness. I knew we could reach you in time. I knew speed would prevent German interference. I knew my men could execute, and I was right. Polk hesitated, then said, Sir, I also heard that Prime Minister Churchill sent you a personal commendation. Patton smiled. He did. Churchill understands what many others do not, that boldness wins wars. He built an empire on that principle, and he recognizes it when he sees it in others. After visiting the wounded, Patton returned to his headquarters, but the story of Churchill's message was already spreading through Third Army, through Scheif, through Allied command, because what Churchill had written officially was impressive. But what Churchill had said privately, music, was extraordinary. The phrase that caught fire through military circles was one Churchill had spoken to Field Marshal Alan Brooke in private conversation after reading the rescue reports. If we had 10 patents, this war would have ended a year ago. It was not in any official dispatch. It was not meant for public consumption. But in military headquarters, secrets do not stay secret. Staff officer talk, aides overhear conversations. Liaison officers report back to their commands. And within days, Churchill's private comment was being repeated throughout the Allied armies. Churchill said, "If we had 10 patents, the war would be over." The statement created shock waves because it was not just praise for Patton, it was implicit criticism of every other Allied general. It suggested that cautious, methodical commanders, music the vast majority of Allied leadership, were prolonging the war. General Omar Bradley heard the comment during a staff meeting at 12th Army Group headquarters. What of his intelligence officers mentioned it casually. "Sir, apparently Churchill told Brooke that 10 patents could have ended the war a year ago." Bradley's expression darkened. "Is that confirmed? Multiple sources from London, sir." Churchill said it after receiving reports of the Task Force Baum rescue. After the meeting, Bradley called Eisenhower. "Ike, have you heard what Churchill supposedly said about Patton?" Eisenhower had heard the 10 patents comment. "Yes, my liaison in London confirmed it. Is it true? Did Churchill actually say that?" According to Field Marshal Brooke's staff, yes, not in an official capacity, but in private conversation. You know how Churchill is. He speaks his mind without considering political implications. Bradley was quiet for a moment. 1 pattern is difficult enough to manage. 10 would be impossible. Eisenhower smiled slightly. Alan Brooke said the exact same thing to Churchill. Churchill's response was, "Better to have difficult generals who win than easy generals who lose." That sounds like Churchill. It does, and unfortunately, he has a point. Eisenhower looked at the operations map on his wall, showing Third Army's positions deeper into Germany than any other Allied force, having advanced faster and farther than anyone else. Patton is impossible to manage. He ignores orders. He takes unauthorized risks. He creates political headaches daily, but he also delivers results no one else can match. Bradley sighed. The Task Force Baum rescue was brilliant. I cannot deny that. But what if it had failed? What if the Germans had cut off his relief column? We could have lost 1 T500 men instead of saving 1 200. But it did not fail. That is Patton's gift. He calculates risks better than music anyone. What looks reckless to us is actually precise judgment to him. He knows exactly how far he can push, how fast he can move, how much risk he can accept, and he is almost always right. The conversation reflected a tension that had existed throughout the war, how to manage Patton. His brilliance was undeniable, but his methods were unorthodox. His temperament was difficult, and his willingness to disobey orders was constant. Yet Churchill, who had managed his own difficult generals for 5 years, had looked at Patton's record and concluded, "We need more like him, not fewer." The story spread beyond military circles. War correspondents picked it up. Within a week, American newspapers were running headlines. Churchill praises Patton's daring rescue, and British PM-10 Patton could have ended war sooner. The American public loved it. Patton had always been controversial, but he was also undeniably successful, and now Churchill, the great Winston Churchill, was saying America's most aggressive general was exactly what the war needed. On April 12, 1945, President Franklin Roosevelt died. Harry Truman became president. One of Truman's first briefings as commander-in-chief included a summary of ongoing operations. In Europe, when the briefer mentioned Third Army's recent activities, including the Task Force Baum rescue, Truman interrupted. "That is the operation Churchill praised." "Correct. Yes, Mr. President." Churchill called it one of the most audacious operations of the war. Truman nodded. "Good. We need more of that. Too much of this war has been fought carefully. Time to finish it aggressively." The comment reflected a shift in thinking. Churchill's endorsement of Patton's methods had given political cover to aggressive operations. If the Prime Minister of Britain, the senior Allied leader, believed boldness was the path to victory, then American commanders could pursue it without fear of political backlash. April 1945, the war in Europe entered its final weeks. German resistance was collapsing. Allied armies were closing in on Berlin from all sides. Third Army continued its rapid advance. Patton drove his forces deeper into Germany and Czechoslovakia, moving so fast that supply lines struggled to keep up. But he did not care about supply lines. He cared about destroying what remained of the German army. On April 30th, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his bunker in Berlin. On May 7th, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. Patton was in Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, when the surrender was announced. He gathered his senior officers and raised a glass of champagne. "Gentlemen, we have won. Third Army has advanced from Normandy to Czechoslovakia in 11 months. We have liberated more territory, captured more prisoners, and destroyed more enemy forces than any other army in this war. And we did it by refusing to be cautious, by attacking when others hesitated, by moving when others consolidated. Churchill understood that, and history will too." After the celebration, Patton returned to his quarters. He pulled out Churchill's message from March and read it again. Then he opened his diary and wrote, May 8th, 1945, "The war is over, we won. And I am satisfied that Third Army fought as well as any army in history. Churchill's recognition of the Task Force Baum operation validated everything I have believed about warfare, that speed and audacity win battles, that hesitation and caution lose them, that the greatest risk is not taking risks when opportunity presents itself. I only wish more Allied commanders had understood this sooner. How many lives could have been saved? How much faster could we have won? We will never know, but Churchill knows, and that is enough. But Patton's time was running short. The war was over. Occupation duties remained. Patton was assigned to govern Bavaria, a task for which his aggressive personality was entirely unsuited. He clashed with occupation authorities, made controversial statements about denazification, suggested that America should prepare to fight the Soviet Union immediately while American forces were still mobilized in Europe. By October 1945, Eisenhower had had enough. He relieved Patton of command of Third Army and reassigned him to a ceremonial position overseeing military history documentation. Patton was crushed. The war was over and he had been pushed aside. The general who had won so many victories was no longer needed. On December 9th, 1945, Patton was riding in a staff car near Mannheim, Germany, when the vehicle collided with a truck. Patton suffered severe spinal injuries. He was paralyzed from the neck down, unable to move anything below his shoulders. He was taken to a military hospital in Heidelberg. Doctors did what they could, but the injuries were catastrophic. Patton knew he was dying. Over the next 12 days, visitors came to his bedside. Generals, politicians, friends. They sat with him, talked with him, tried to comfort him. On December 20th, one visitor asked General, "What is your greatest accomplishment from the war?" Patton thought for a long moment before answering, "Task Force Baum. When 200 men who would have died, I saved them by doing what everyone said was impossible." Churchill understood that. He recognized it. "That operation proved everything I believed about warfare. What do you mean, sir, that boldness works, that speed saves lives, that the greatest generals are not the most cautious but the most aggressive? Churchill built an empire on that principle, and when he saw me apply it, he recognized a kindred spirit." Patton paused, struggling to breathe. "I wish I could have done more. I wish I could have moved faster in 1944. I wish I could have crossed the Rhine in September instead of March. I wish American command had trusted audacity instead of fearing it. But General, you won. Third Army record is extraordinary. We won, but we could have won faster. We could have saved more lives." Churchill understood that. That is why he said what he said about 10 patents. He knew that caution prolongs wars and boldness ends them. George S. Patton died on December 21st, 1945. He was 60 years old. Among his personal effects was Churchill's message from March 1945, carefully preserved in his papers. It was one of the few combinations Patton had kept, placed in a leather folder alongside his most treasured documents. News of Patton's death reached London on December 22nd. Churchill was at his country estate, Chartwell, when he received the telegram. He read it, set it down, and walked to his study window. He stood there for over an hour looking out over the English countryside, smoking a cigar, saying nothing. His wife Clementine found him there. "Winston, are you all right? I have just learned that General Patton has died, a car accident in Germany. I am sorry. I know you respected him." Churchill turned from the window. Respected, yes. More than that, though. I recognized in Patton something rare. a general who understood that war is won by those willing to take risks. Britain used to produce such men, Nelson, Wellington, Gordon, but in this war we became cautious and America produced Patton. You are being too hard on British commanders, am I? Montgomery took months to do what Patton did in weeks. We planned operations with such caution that opportunities vanished before we could exploit them. Meanwhile, Patton was racing across France and Germany, winning battles everyone said could not be won. That Task Force Baum rescue 150 km in 36 hours. I wish a British force had done that. I wish I had commanded a general capable of it. Churchill walked to his desk and pulled out stationery. I need to issue a statement about Patton's death. He wrote by hand, carefully choosing each word. The death of General George S. Patton Jr. is a profound loss to the Allied cause and to the military profession. He was one of the great captains of this war, a commander whose boldness, speed, and tactical brilliance achieved victories that more cautious men would not have attempted. I had the privilege of witnessing his methods firsthand, and while I did not always agree with his approach, I always admired his results. His rescue of 1,200 surrounded soldiers by advancing 150 km through enemy territory in 36 hours will be studied by military historians for generations as an example of audacious leadership. History will remember General Patton as a warrior without equal, and the world is poorer for his loss. Winston S. Churchill. The statement was released that evening to the British and American press. It appeared in newspapers on both sides of the Atlantic the next day, but Churchill was not finished. Over the next months, as he began work on his memoir, The Second World War, he devoted significant attention to Patton. In the chapter covering the final campaigns of 1945, Churchill wrote, General Patton possessed qualities rare in modern commanders: absolute confidence in his own judgment, willingness to take risks that terrified his superiors, and the ability to move armies at speeds that defied conventional doctrine. His rescue of 1 to 200 surrounded soldiers in March 1945 by advancing 150 km through enemy territory in 36 hours remains one of the most remarkable operations of the war. It exemplified everything Patton believed, that boldness wins, that speed saves lives, and that the greatest danger in war is excessive caution. Churchill continued, I did not always agree with Patton's methods. I found his personality difficult and his public statements often problematic, but I recognized his genius. War is not won by following rules. It is won by breaking them intelligently. Patton understood this instinctively, and I often thought, if Britain had produced a commander with Patton's audacity and skill, how much shorter this terrible war might have been. The Task Force Baum rescue proved that modern mechanized warfare could be conducted at speeds previous generations would have thought impossible. Patton did not just win battles, he redefined how battles could be won. The final paragraph of Churchill's assessment became famous. I once remarked privately that if we had 10 Pattons, this war would have ended a year ago. I stand by that statement, not because Patton was without flaws. He had many, but because he possessed the one quality that wins wars, the willingness to act decisively when others hesitate. That is the mark of true military genius, and Patton possessed it in abundance. When Churchill's memoirs were published in the 1950s, that passage ensured Patton's legacy because Churchill was not just any memoist. He was the defining leader of the Second World War, the man who had personified resistance to tyranny, and he was saying that Patton had been right all along. The debate about Patton's methods continued for decades. Military historians argued about whether his risks were justified, whether his tactics could be replicated, whether boldness or caution was the better approach to modern warfare. But Churchill's endorsement settled one question definitively. Patton's Task Force Baum rescue was a masterpiece of operational art. 150 km in 36 hours, 200 men saved. Executed with minimal casualties despite moving through heavily defended enemy territory. Militaries around the world added the operation to their curriculum. Staff colleges analyzed Patton's decision, making his route planning, his willingness to bypass resistance, his calculation of risk versus reward, and always they quoted Churchill's assessment, one of the most audacious and successful tactical maneuvers of this war. Today, 80 years later, the Task Force Baum rescue remains the gold standard for rapid armored exploitation. When military planners discuss how fast mechanized forces can move, how deep they can penetrate, how much risk they can accept, they reference Patton's operation. And when they discuss the balance between boldness and caution, between audacity and prudence, between following doctrine and breaking it, they quote Churchill's tribute to Patton. Because Churchill understood something fundamental: wars are not won by avoiding mistakes. They are won by seizing opportunities, and Patton seized opportunities no one else would touch. The final irony is this: Churchill and Patton never became friends. They met only a handful of times during the war. Each encounter was tense, marked by clashing personalities and conflicting egos, but they respected each other deeply because both understood what it meant to lead in impossible circumstances. Both knew what it took to make decisions that could save or destroy thousands of lives. Both recognized that greatness required taking risks that terrified lesser men, and when Patton executed his impossible rescue, 150 km in 36 hours, 200 men saved, Churchill did not hesitate to acknowledge it.